The 1971 war completes 50 years on 16th December this year. It was a historic war in which the 93,000 Pakistani soldiers had surrendered to the Indian Army and the Mukti Bahini. The war was fought in unison by the three forces. The Indian Navy played a very significant role in the war. Today, we have Commodore Shrikant Kesnur, the naval historian, with us to discuss the role of Indian Navy in the 1971 war.
Navy played a very significant role during the war. And today we are here because I specifically want people to know Navy's contribution during the 71 war. My first question to you is, can you please explain Navy's role in the 1971 war and its outcome?
Hello, Diksha. Greetings to all the listeners, all those who are going to view this. Yes, of course, it's an important question, particularly because, as you brought out, the role of the Navy is not much known. So the Navy played an exceedingly important role in the 1971 war, if I can say so. And the importance stems from three or four issues. First is that this was the first war in which the Navy had a significant role to play. Junagadh, just after independence, was a small coercive action. Goa, the Navy was used, but it was in a limited theater. In 1965, it was largely a defensive role assigned to the Navy. So in 71, it was the first time the Navy was used in the way that navies ought to be used, in a very offensive role, and so as to make significant difference to issues on land. The second important point, particularly to the Navy, is that it was operating in both the theaters, that is the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea. Almost all the operations that are there in classical Navy operations, fleet operations, anti-submarine operations, submarine operations, aircraft carrier for sea control, amphibious operations, surface raids and attacks, indeed even subversive clandestine operations. All of this happened. I mean, everyone from the Navy came to party, so to say, and that was a very big thing. But the most important issue is that the Navy, by the way it sort of strangulated Pakistan by its attacks on the west and in the east, and totally sort of exerted, let's say, a dominance over the Pakistan Navy, that resulted in the sea being blocked either for logistic support or people to escape. Therefore, if you had more than 90,000 prisoners of war at the end of it, which is a huge, political outcome, then the Navy was responsible because the sea route had been completely strangulated. Therefore, that also played a very important part. So all in all, the people and our leadership came to see how navies can play a role in the war, how they can influence affairs on land. And I think that is the Navy's biggest contribution in 1971 war. There are, of course, lots of wonderful individual stories and incidents, and we could talk about that as we go along.
So, talking about the Western Front, including the attacks of the missile boats, please share what was unique about it.
Yes. What was unique about it is that while the East was in some senses the center of gravity as far as the war was concerned in very many ways, as far as Pakistan was concerned, to their own planning calculus, West Pakistan was very important, and Karachi, as far as the Pakistan Navy was concerned, was its headquarters, its very citadel. You know, now what the Indian Navy did was an amazing, rather audacious plan to use missile boats, and we had procured these missile boats from Russia just a couple of years, just a year and a half earlier in 1970. Of course, people had gone for training a little bit earlier than that. So these missile boats, which were essentially meant for coastal defense, were used in an attacking role. And how were they used in an attacking role? By having them forward deployed, by making them, taking them rather to the theater of action, so to say, uh, halfway or some ways towing them, So that was a tactical sort of chutzpah that was displayed, a tactical innovation. Nobody had thought that the missile boats could be towed to some distance. They were forward deployed, and they went right into the lion's den, so to say, and attacked. And that is very, very important. Specifically, what happened on the 4th of December, just as war had started on 3rd, missile boats, 3 missile boats, INS Nirghat, INS Veer, and INS Nipat, Nipat being the senior ship on which Commander Babru Yadav was embarked. These 3 went. They were escorted by Kiltan and Kachal, and they went and attacked Karachi. Now, the missile boats, the ships there was Khyber, the destroyer, Muhafiz, the minesweeper, a couple of other merchant ships, which were supplying goods or equipment to the Pakistan Navy, were attacked, and they all either sank or they were damaged severely. And Pakistan Navy did not know where this attack was coming from. In fact, they thought it was coming from the air. And then one of the missiles went and hit the Kimari oil refinery and caused fires there. So cumulatively, the physical damage was huge. On the very first day of war, some of their units had been taken out. They sank. The ships returned safely without any problems. And the psychological damage was much more because they did not know where the attack had come from. Now, as if this was not enough, this was reinforced on the 8th when Operation Python was launched. Now, Trident was launched from southern axis, whereas Python came in from the western axis. Python was Vinash, INS Vinash, one ship which was towed, accompanied and towed for some distance by INS Trishul and Talwar. And again on the 8th, they attacked, and she took all 4 missiles were attacked. And once again, Pakistani, they had one tanker was out, PNS Dhaka, that was hit. 2 merchant ships were hit. And again, the refinery oil fires are just being put out, and they were hit again. And this time there was a huge explosion. So what happened is the physical damage was reinforced. The psychological damage became worse. None of the Indian Navy ships were attacked. The Pakistani Air Force tried to chase, the Navy tried to chase. They given to understand they hit one of their own ships, PNS Zulfikar. So it was a sort of mad melee in which they lost a huge amount of people. Now, cumulatively, what this happened is, by the 8th, not only were Pakistani Navy ships told to come inside harbor, but they were also told to de-ammunition, which meant that apna wo astra aur shastra nikal ke ab baithe hain. Now, what can be a better this one for the enemy than saying that, okay, now I'm no longer getting into combat. So they effectively given up. The point is that they had conceded by coming in, and they had sort of didn't come out anymore. So automatically the control of the seas in the Northern Arabian Sea fell upon the Indian Navy. And that meant that any ship going to Pakistan now had to take permission from the Indian Navy to enter or leave. So that kind of stranglehold, which I explained earlier, was caused by this double attack by the missile boats. In addition, mind you, the Western Fleet was out there, so they further spread out to the left. They had several other actions, small actions. They captured the merchant ships. The fleet captured a ship called Madhumati, which was supplying ammunition to Pakistan. So there were a whole lot of all these things also that was happening. The Western Fleet support to the missile boats is very important in various ways, and because of that, they established what we call as sea control in the North Arabian Sea, and they in a sense kept Pakistan Navy inside their harbor and made it possible for the surrender to happen very soon.
I would just like to ask you, since we have spoken about the Western Fleet, so now when we have spoken about the Western Fleet, automatically the next question which comes to me is the Eastern Fleet. So talking about the Eastern Fleet, INS Vikrant, the majestic INS Vikrant, played a very, very important role during the war. For the benefit of our viewers and listeners, if you could please explain its significance in the entire war.
Yes, I think that's a very good question. The Eastern Fleet played a huge role. Now, you must understand that Eastern Fleet was actually born just a month before the war. In fact, 1st November now, 1st November 2021 is 50 years, so the golden jubilee of the Eastern Fleet. It was formed, so to say, just before the war. It was born in the dawn of war, so to say, and that it established a very glorious sort of history right after that. Now, interestingly, the Navy had decided early on to shift the aircraft carrier Vikrant to the east because Admiral Nanda had foreseen that the east will be more decisive theater of war for the final outcome, So the aircraft carrier was put there. Newly formed Eastern Fleet, there were not too many units. There were two of the Kamorta class, Kamorta and Kavrati, and two of the Betwa class, Brahmaputra and Bias. Along with this, that formed the Eastern Fleet, the aircraft carrier. I mean, there were some amphibious ships, there was INS Rajput, but they were not necessarily with the fleet all the time. Now, these 5 ships and the aircraft carriers embark component of the Seahawk fighter aircraft and the Elysee reconnaissance, but which also had weapons for bombardment. Together, this formidable entity, so to say, at least as far as the theater was concerned, managed to bring about a huge amount of damage and devastation in what was then East Pakistan. So you see, what was happening is the Indian Army was advancing, the Indian Air Force was pounding, and now the Indian Navy, using the carrier-based aircraft, the Seahawks and Sea Harriers, pounded all the port towns, Chittagong, Chalna, Khulna, Munga, Barisal, whole lot of port infrastructure, air control towers, jetties, ships in harbor. So as a result, completely the logistic support. After all, you needed East Pakistan to be sustained. You needed goods, you needed food, you needed ammunition, you needed fuel to come from west or somewhere. And all that could not happen because of the fantastic action by Eastern Fleet. Now, interestingly, the Eastern Fleet commander, Admiral Sarma, who is still, you'd be interested to know, he's with us. He's alive as a wonderful young person at the age of 99. He turns 99 on 1st December, and in an interview just a few days ago, he mentioned about how initial orders were to operate at 100 miles from the coast, and he realized that if that happens, it would amount to two boxers sparring in their own corner, and he decided to close to 50 miles, and that resulted in a huge amount of action from more just about 5 sorties that were planned, 5 missions. They ultimately flew close to 100 missions and more than 400 sorties. So that's fantastic. I think both these aircraft, the Seahawks under the command of Gupta, Santosh Kumar Gupta, Mahavir Chakra, who's also incidentally in Bangalore. He still gives wonderful news about his own exploits. And the Elysee is commanded by Ravi Dheer, Commander Ravi Dheer Veer Chakra, whose birth anniversary is today. And we must remember him, the late Ravi Dheer. And the Elysees did some fantastic job. So together, I think they caught ships that were fleeing, the Eastern Fleet ships, and we must not ignore them. They bombarded, they helped in the amphibious assault, and they also captured ships. Pakistani soldiers, families, other people were fleeing, and they were all captured by these fleet ships and taken to Kolkata. So as a result of all this, you can see cumulative physical and psychological damage of being continuously pounded, of being captured, of being not allowed to go. That resulted in some huge amount of damage. And the aircraft carrier was the principal architect of our victory in the East. There were also, interestingly, two other operations called Force Alpha and Operation X, if you wish. I could explain that subsequently.
As far as I know, and as far as my reading goes, INS Vikrant was being repaired.
The question was not of repair. Let me explain to you. INS Vikrant had a boiler that was down. It had four boilers. It was a steam turbine ship. Steam is used to propel. You must remember that we had brought Vikrant from the British. So a lot of technology, a lot of spares were with the British. So one of the boilers was down, and when one of the boilers was down, then you don't get sufficient speed for your aircraft carrier to be operated.
Hmm.
Now, what does that mean? When you have low speed for your aircraft carrier to be operated, one, you may not be able to fly your aircraft, because flying on an aircraft carrier requires a fair bit of relative wind, which is a function of the ship speed and the actual wind. So higher the ship speed, the better it is for aircraft launch. Second, you need high speeds to avoid submarines, and there was submarine threat. Otherwise you are a sitting duck if you are going at slow speeds. Third is the lack of one boiler meant that you did not have adequate steam for the catapult, which is again needed to launch the aircraft carrier. So this was a serious challenge. But what is wonderful is how the Indian Navy responded to the challenge, because the British said that they would take 2 or 3 years. 3 years, I think they said, to replace the boiler. It meant Vikrant would have been effectively out of war. And if she had been out of war, there would have been lots of criticism about not putting in the aircraft carrier there. So the Indian Navy decided that come what way, we must use it. And therefore, initially they said, okay, let us see, can we embark aircraft? Can we do what are called rollers? When wind conditions are suitable, do practice flying, get everyone serious, start doing the drills, and then let us see if we can get the boiler back online. And Vikrant had an amazing engineering crew. Admiral Bilu Chowdhury, he was then the commander the chief engineer officer, so to say, of Vikrant. Bilu ji just passed away a couple of years ago. Fantastic guy, Veer Chakra winner. He and his team actually devised a lot of innovative solutions to make sure that the cracks on the boiler, because of which the boiler had been put down, were temporarily repaired. The consequences, if it had burst, would have been catastrophic, but they took their risks. They made sure that there were people at correct places. They did engineering innovations, and all that is a different story in itself. We could talk about that at some other time. But Bilu Chaudhary and his team made sure that the fourth boiler came online just before the war started. And that's a stunning, stupendous engineering achievement. But he had the full support of the Navy, his captain, Captain Swaraj Prakash, his fleet commander, Admiral Sarma, his CNC, Admiral Krishnan, and the Navy Chief, Admiral Nanda. All of them supported Binu Chaudhary. And I think ultimately what they did with Vikrant was a miracle. So, as they say, fortune favors the brave. And by the time war started, the boilers were there. Aircraft carrier operated with full freedom, with all the speed she could get, and all the aircraft were launched.
In war, there is always damage on both the sides. And now, when we talk about it, so I would like to talk to you about INS Kukri. So, can you just explain and touch on that aspect as well?
Yes, I mean, of course, in a general sense, you're right that war results in damage to both sides. But I think you must see both the context and sort of the content, if I can say so. The Indian Navy lost only the Kukri. It was a sad loss, whereas the Pakistan Navy lost almost all its navy. So there can be no comparison, so to say, between the two sides. Having said that, yes, of course, we did lose the Kukri. You must remember two, three things. Warm waters, such as what we have in our oceans, are distinctly more favorable to the submarines than to surface ships. That's the nature of propagation of sound, and you can't do much about that. Notwithstanding that, you can't allow submarines to operate with impunity in war. So the Indian Navy, having learnt about the Hangor being off due, employed the surface force of Kukri and Kirpan. Actually, Kuthar, which was the third ship of the squadron, could not accompany them because she had a breakdown. So normally, having had three ships might have been preferable, but two ships were sent to hunt the submarine because a signal had to be sent, and the submarine had to be kept, as you say, in that corner, in that place. So these two ships went to on what is called a hunter-killer mission to search for the submarine. They were of an earlier technological vintage. So the submarine, which was of a later generation, later vintage, that had better sensors anyway, and therefore she detected the surface ships before, and she was at an advantage. And therefore, the outcome was that she aimed her torpedoes and fired, and she hit the Kukri, two torpedoes, and Kukri went down. I think what must be remembered of the Kukri episode is the fantastic and inspiring leadership of Captain Mahendranath Malla, who went down with the ship, even though he was on the bridge. He tried with the people to rescue, send as many people in just those couple of minutes. But he established what can be called a standard, an exemplar for future generations of Navy officers, that when he went down with his men to show what leadership is all about. Yes, we indeed lost a ship, and we will forever be sorry about that. We learn our lessons. We try to make sure that it doesn't happen in future. But having said that, while we lost a ship, we gained one of the finest heroes. We had a tradition that shines much light for future generations on as an example. So I think that is what we must take as the lesson from INS Kukri's loss.
One very important aspect of the entire 71 war set of aircraft carrier enterprising group as threatened by the US. How did the Indian Navy deal with it?
That's a very interesting question. Look, I think it was dealt with at various different ways. The political leadership utilized whatever diplomatic channels that it could to meet this challenge. And one of that was, as you are aware, before the war, Indo-Soviet friendship treaty was there. So there was, say, the top political and diplomatic leadership met the challenge in its own way. As far as the armed forces were concerned, I think the Navy's appreciation clearly from all the top leadership and the books that you read, I think the Navy's appreciation was that this is a show of force by the US Navy. Uh, I don't know if they were sure whether the US Navy would get into or would want to get into this battle, because it frankly had no stakeholdership in this. So the idea was not to give in to that coercive power projection, to call out that for whatever it was. Therefore, Admiral Nanda's signal to his commanding officers that if you meet the enterprise group, invite them for a tea. I think in many ways summoned up the diplomatic aspect being given by the Navy, and to call out that sort of coercive bluff, if it can be called that. But at a more instrumental level, so to say, I think the Indian Navy, along with the other two services, realize that the operation should be completed before the enterprise group is anywhere able to influence events. And I think the speed of operation of all the three forces, whereby before the enterprise group could enter into any area of significance, the operations had more or less been finished. I mean, before she came into the Indian Ocean region, it was more or less over. All the three services had acted so swiftly. The Indian Navy had established so much dominance, and war now came to an end. So the surrender happened. So I think the presence of the enterprise was largely made irrelevant by all the three services.
So before we come to an end, my last question to you would be, can you discuss and can you talk about the war heroes? And there are many tidbits during the war. So if you could please tell our listeners and viewers about it.
Yes, I mean, there are lots of very, very interesting things. We had discussed the leadership aspects of Captain Mahendranath Malla, Commander Babru Yadav, who led the missile boat attack. I mean, another fantastic, fascinating guy. And he was a bachelor officer. His recollections say he was, he was a lifelong bachelor. He passed away a bachelor. So Babru embarked the Nipat as the squadron commander, even though he was not required to. And his answer later, when he was asked why he did so, is because he says that I was not married, I had nobody to sort of uh, give an explanation to. I thought I must be there. But that's, I mean, the lightness part, he was leading by example. Small ship and this one. Then Commander Jarath, Lieutenant Commander Jarath, Vijay Jarath, who led the attack of Python. He says that when he turned the ship around and after the attack, he saw what was the uh, biggest, what he thought was as though Karachi was all ablaze. And the accompanying ship said, this is the biggest Diwali gift that we have got. So there was, and the code word Angar, which was transmitted to indicate successful firing of Trident. So all these are very, very, in fact, the entire missile boats thing is an interesting story. This Beas had a breakdown with its gun, and without a gun, you can pretty well be, out of combat. But Jugaad solution was employed, and I think the cigarette foils of the cigarette packets were used to repair it. So these are marvelous studies later for innovation. In fact, the use of missile boats itself is a classic innovation. But most importantly, Diksha, 1971 was about leadership shown by all echelons of the Indian Navy, at the tactical level by people, at the operational level, tactical level by people like Babru Yadav, M.N. Malla, Gopal Rao, by all fleet ship captain, by MNR Saman, by fleet ships captains in the East. Swaraj Prakash, the captain of the aircraft carrier, outstanding officer, very well loved. The aircraft carrier crew, I told you, S.K. Gupta and Ravi Dhir, great leadership at the operational level. At the higher level than that, Admiral Krishnan, who was the CNC East, one of India's finest combat leaders, did wonderfully well. Admiral Kohli in the West, the two fleet commanders, Chandy Kuruvilla and S.H. Sama, displayed great savvy, and that was another sort of great effort. But overall and above everything, I think the 71 war victory of the Navy belongs to Admiral S.M. Nanda. He was the chief, he was the skipper, he had that big idea, that big vision, whether it was about employing missile boats, whether it was changing the Navy's mindset from defensive to offensive, whether it was giving the go ahead for Operation X, whether it was deciding to employ the aircraft carrier in the East, whether it was backing his people. I think Admiral Nanda deserves great kudos. Admiral Chatterjee before him did fantastic work in making sure that Navy's fleet strength was beefed. We got submarines, we got the missile boats, we got the Petia class corvettes, all of that during Admiral Chatterjee's time, the seeking aircraft. But Admiral Nanda carried that forward, and he was the right man at the right spot. He was the Big Mac thinker, as Sandeep Punithan describes him. And I think 71 war, in many ways, the Navy's credit for that should go to Admiral Nanda. I'm mentioning this specifically because 2 days from now, on the 10th of October, is his birth anniversary. And I think your interview can be a very wonderful tribute to one of the finest naval leaders of modern times.
Thank you so much, sir, for talking to us. It was indeed a pleasure talking to you, sir.
Thank you. Pleasure was mine too. And greetings to all your viewers and listeners. And hope they're enthused to know and read more about the Navy's role in 1971 war and the other operations. Wishing you and them all the very best.
The story of guts, glory, and heroism shall continue. We will return next week with more such untold stories. Till then, stay tuned and keep following Organiser.